This is the EnT podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located in Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am on Treaty Number 8 territory, the traditional meeting grounds and gathering places of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
Hey everyone, Dr. Matt here with you for the latest edition of the EdNonTech Show. With me as ever, the inestimable Dr. Doug Reed, and it is in our world the Sunday afternoon/evening, depending on what side of the North American continent you happen to be on. We are trying something a bit, dare I say, innovative in terms of our format. We're actually going to do a two-peat. We're going to do one episode on one aspect of a thing, and then right after, we're going to commence with another. I might change a t-shirt. I might change the background. Might switch up the minions a bit. But quite frankly, it's a novel approach to the thing, and I'm laying this squarely at the feet of Dr. Doug, who is sort of the person who devised both the topics and the format for this particular show. So honestly, I'm stoked to be here. I mean, I'm always stoked to be here. Go figure. Nothing unusual about that. But I am interested for sure just to say saludos, hello. Hope you're having an easy transition into the colder months of the year, wherever you happen to be, because that can be awful terrible on people. It can, in terms of their mental health and well-being. So I'd just like to say, wherever you are and whenever you are, I hope you're taking care of yourself in times such as these. That's my opening gambit there, Doug. How you doing, pal? What are we even up to with this episode? But more importantly, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully.
Awesome.
I really am. For the last 3 weeks, I had the flu, and then I took a COVID shot and had a reaction to that, and then I had a migraine last week with the weather change. So it's been 4 days where it's just been awesome. I've had, or 3 days in a row where I haven't felt like rubbish. So that's a giant win for me.
Not feeling like garbage in the morning is important.
It really, really is.
Totally.
And I've had such a wonderful weekend. It's like we put the garden to rest. Like we dealt with all of finishing the garden off. And I like to start next year's trees in the garden. So I'll take like a garden pot that will have flowers in it all summer and stuff. And I take that and I dig a hole in the garden and I stick the pot in the hole, fill it with dirt, and then I plant tree seeds or acorns or whatever. And if something comes up, then that's a bonus for next spring. And if nothing comes up, that's a pile of dirt that's going back in the garden anyway. So it's just, I like to experiment. I need to try. I'm never going to be a horticulturalist or a botanist, but I like seeing what there is to see and playing around.
Well, the amateur naturalist is a thing that is worth pursuing, right? I mean, all those outcomes you get from being engaging with that, right? In terms of interaction with the physical environment, in terms of the mental health and well-being that comes from the neuroplasticity enhancements from engaging in new activities on the regular. These are all significant benefits that I certainly don't need to dissemble on here, but sounds absolutely lit, my friend. Sounds like a good way to spend the better part of a weekend.
Oh, yeah. And when your hands get dirty, all those microbes and all that stuff gets in there and it helps your immune system and it just makes you feel better.
It's true.
And the best part is I could bend over and it didn't feel like somebody was wailing away with a hammer on the side of my head. So that was just a treat, because migraines are horrific. They are not fun.
I've never experienced them. I've been fortunate to not have
Yep.
that be something I've had to encounter. I am aware of just how brutal that must be, not even being able to concentrate to read or even do any screen time particularly, right? I mean, that's going to be
Oh yeah.
can be pretty taxing. So again, good on you for powering through it, my friend.
Oh, I was pretty whiny. I was feeling
Okay.
sorry for myself. So thank you for that. Thank you for the assumption that I was
Handling it
not
well.
whiny. Yeah. It's handled. But
It's in hand. Was well. I can't think of a better way, which means I can't think of any way other than to lead into our topic proper. What are we talking about, my man?
okay. We're going to talk about some history of innovation in education. And that is not where we started. That is not the conversation. I don't know if I think I shared it with you. I'm not sure, but that was not where I was headed.
Okay.
And one of the articles we're going to read here is a 2004 article by Kirshner et al. And
Yep.
that damn article changed the topic. I read it,
Okay.
and I was like, most articles, like when I go into this, like I treat it like an education class. Okay, get some bits of literature, get a concept, get some support, and figure out how I'm going to talk.
Sure.
And it's been kind of perfunctory, right? I have that down. Here, do this. Here, do that. Go look for this. Take this quote. This article made me think hard. It was like, oh, I guess I've been missing that. Maybe I need
above
to
and
think a little
beyond,
harder.
above and beyond other aspects or other citations and references and things you come across that you bring into
Yes.
this. So what
Yeah.
is it about the art? What is it about that particular citation? I mean, not to preview too much, but it sounds pretty significant. What was the trigger there for you to kind of put you on the path that we're on?
The big trigger was I found a great quote and thought I was done. I found another passage and said, oh, wow, this one's good too. I want to talk about this. I ended up with like 7. And it's like, oh, should we do a whole thing on this? And then I'm like, oh, wait, this is about how to do innovation in education. This isn't about, like, it was going to be innovation fails. Basically,
Okay.
It was like the top 10 list or top 100 list of all the tech innovations that have failed or are gone or whatever. And then it was, no, we need to do the history, because it forced me to think about what innovation was in education, because I was firmly mired in my background. And this made me expand my horizons and really made me think about it. And it was like, okay, I'm going to cut it down, really focus on this. And that's why we're doing the history of it, not just here's a bunch of innovation. I'm sure we'll talk about some stuff that failed, but,
Yeah.
That's not the only place we're going to go. So that Kirshner article it made me question myself, which is what I really liked, because I kind of know what I'm talking about most of the time, or I try not to talk them. So that's where we're coming from.
Well, that's dope. And I appreciate here the focus on innovation, because my experience has been that's a word that tends to get misused or overused or bastardized. Or again, I think at this point in my career, 2 jobs out, I can tell you that the most turbulent professional period in my career as an educator was spent during 4 years in which I belonged to a department called the Learning, Technology, and Innovations Department. And let me tell you, no aspect of those 3 key terms really landed within the department, and the innovation part especially, because the person who I reported to, who I just did not see eye to eye with pretty much out of the gate, to my detriment, as it turned out, more than his, but he had literally the word innovation in his job title, and not a faculty member, not anybody who's actually been, vetted by the academic process beyond a master's degree. I told an undergrad student, I was like, anybody can do a master's degree. The secret is out. Anybody can do a master's degree. It's the baccalaureate that's hard, and it's the PhD that hard. Anybody can do a master's degree. So, again, given my personal, tumultuous kind of time within that department, working for this particular person, that word has sort of become problematic for me. Innovation. Like, I think I'm a smart guy. I think I'm a creative guy. Innovation, I'm kind of steering away from it. So I appreciate the opportunity. Even though I do innovative things within my practice, I don't consider it innovation because that word's somewhat of an anathema to me. An anathema. That's a 50-cent word.
I like that word.
That's where I'm coming from here, pal, based on what you've kind of set up for us. So appreciate you.
Okay, now to keep steering you down that road down that path, when you think of educational innovation, like other than that background that you had at the place that shall not be mentioned, who thought that lobotomized wiki was innovation.
Right.
And lobotomized wiki goes, you got to go back a couple of episodes, like 30 episodes or something well, I'm not going back to that.
I may link that one in the notes.
Okay.
You tell.
But when you think of educational innovation, can you give me a rough idea? Like, I know you don't like the word because of the way it's been used and the way people have taken ownership of it, but what does it mean to you? Like, could you describe an innovation to me, an educational innovation? Can you just describe one?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. So if I'm sort of putting away the irony, if I'm putting away my sort of mental self-defense techniques, if I kind of remove myself from, say, my immediate personal context, my history of sorts with the term, if I just sort of look at it unbiasedly, right, through a somewhat objective viewpoint, I'm going to go back to the opening premise of the show, which is that technology is a cognitive tool, right? Anything that's technology or idea driven, you put the primacy on the idea and then you work out the application. And so if we're talking about an innovative idea, then I'll go, okay, so, constructivism or the Paulo Freire kind of level stuff, right? Pedagogy of the oppressed. This is the kind of thing where the innovation is in a well considered concept, where you do all the conceptual work front loaded, right? Where you start out like making sure that the why and the how kind of questions, those larger questions, are answered adequately before you even start to manifest outward. Innovation as such, I'm thinking of the practical development and moving forward of an application based on a process, based on a creative, well-vetted, well-considered process, ideally relying on the local context for significance, backed by peer-reviewed, hopefully, tests and literature, hopefully, and an originality of thinking suited to bring practice and theory in a way that makes sense, praxis, as it were, within our educational sort of area. That's kind of where I see some affinity. This whole notion of praxis, I think, is fairly well tied to legitimate original innovation, which actually, again, is just kind of a practical application to a very wide-ranging and robust conceptual idea kind of thing. Does that make sense here, pal? Does that sound like that is reasonable?
It does. And to be honest, I felt like I was a fisherman on the back of like a deep sea trawler, because that net you cast is wide.
It is.
That's going to catch a whole lot.
Again, originality of thinking isn't that original, but it's the vetting it process. I'm like, I told students recently, anybody can do a master's degree if you are put in the slot, because everything that requires you to do that degree is established when you get into the slot. They won't put you in there unless you stand a chance of being successful. And because of the nature of those programs, those master's programs are typically 2 years, 3 years at the most, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of a go-between between, well, the graduate and then your kind of higher level stuff, the PhD, if that's what you're going to go for. Again, it's really what distinguishes between something that simply has talent or simply sounds like a good idea is the hard work, is the constant testing in a lab condition, or constantly, or being prepared to spend 5 hours messing around with something until you get 10 minutes of good usage that you need to do your thing. Again, so many aborted experiments behind the scenes of this podcast. So many episodes we didn't use, so many just stuff that didn't make the cut, or stuff, even if it did make the cut, we look after certain episodes and go, probably don't need to try that again. Probably could do things a bit different. So I think, again, innovation is something that kind of comes out of necessity. Innovation for its own sake is just a lobotomized wiki. Innovation for its own sake is kind of just performative, right? Look at me. Or we need to divert some of the budget towards this, or we won't get the same amount of budget next year. So we better find something with a catchphrase or a bumper sticker that we can broadcast as being our innovation within the org, right? I can tell you lots of things that innovation isn't, but we want to keep it on the positive here, right, pal?
Yeah, we really do.
We really do. Boy, do we.
When it comes to ed tech innovation, we're going to cover that a little bit later, I hope. But what I'm talking about right now is part of what Kirshner et al. Sent me off to, and it was bigger than just the technology, because I think the technology. Well, I went looking for ed tech fails in the 19th or 20th century, and every one of them was high tech electronic. And I'm like, no, this isn't what I'm looking for. But everyone seemed to be owned by Silicon Valley.
Technology, as in it's got to have circuits, or it's got to be hardware, or it's got to be software. Again, This is where very, very, very early into the doctoral program, and even when I was in my master's degree, if I'm being honest, the notion of technology as a thought process first, before manifesting in a circuit, before manifesting as high electronics or an app on your phone or whatever. You got to have the conceptual clarity. You got to have a vision, because then otherwise you're just wasting time in skunk works, failed development, and stuff that actually draws off resources from the main mandate of the organization, actually. So, pal, are we ready to go way back in the Wayback Machine here? That's
sure. We can definitely do that. And this is going to be more about innovation in education, not innovation in ed tech. And it's from 1872. It's from Howell, and it's a report about education in British India. And it blew my mind.
I'll bet.
Because one of the categories that Howell had was educational machinery or schools. So it wasn't even the infrastructure, it was machinery. And it's like, so Howell, I am almost 100% certain Howell is a guy. I couldn't find the first name, but it was 150 years ago, and it was for the government. I'm pretty sure he was probably an old white guy. That's my assumption.
It may or may not be Mrs. Howell tending the harp at home, as the case may be.
So Howell had a list, and this is for the big federal government in the UK. Here's what innovations they've done, and one of them was female education, and that blew my mind. It was like, what do you mean? Oh, that's right. Girls weren't allowed to be in school, right? Or girls had those schools. They weren't allowed in the mainstream. They were only allowed in whatever. They got the other education. And that was my first thought of, oh no, I've been in my little bubble and I need to break out and get out of my echo chamber and see what else is out there. And he talked about a bunch of stuff. It's like education for the masses. That was another innovation. It wasn't just education for the rich people. It was the masses deserve education. And then just blew my mind that female education was its own category. It was its own big category in this report. Look at what we're doing. We're educating women. And I was like, wow, okay. So
Well,
Kirchner
again, that's
was first. This was
that
second.
Awesome.
Oh yeah. So, and there's other stuff in the report, and what he was doing is he was basically presenting, here's what's going on at all the places that we control in India, right? Here's what's going on education wise, and it's talking about, like, anytime I can read something about Bengal, it's like that name, it just seems exotic to me. It's because I read those old books about that, right? So it's I love that kind of stuff. But one thing that the English had when they were controlling India is they had 5 layers of education, depending on who you were and where you were born.
Right.
So indigenous education was like the locals, the people that were there before the English got there. That was indigenous education. There's not even like North American indigenous, it's India indigenous.
Of course.
Because of course anything that comes before the English isn't real. They're not whatever.
Anything pre-European contact may be described fairly as indigenous in this context.
In this context, because one of the quotes I grabbed was, the purely native schools not improved up to government standard is what they called indigenous. And it was like, oh, that's horrific on so many levels.
Yeah.
that's just, oh my goodness.
But it's really only been even the past couple decades that we, even in our perch, I suppose, have been able to really call that out for what it is, having the terminology and the cultural agency. I mean, if you just by any metric, it's really only been, even since the 70s, not even necessarily. We're talking like since middle 80s and thereabouts, for this to even be, for even an awareness of the kinds of issues that you're referring to here. So we're talking recent habits compared to what we're seeing in this article, which, even though it's dated, the datedness of it is still contemporary in its datedness.
Yes. And I'm sure 30, 40, 80 years from now, people will look back on this podcast and say, wow, those guys were so out of date with whatever it was they were saying. Because things change, right? Things,
exactly.
We all stand on the shoulders of the giants that came before us. So, but he had a list, and the list of educational machinery or schools was the indigenous schools, the lower class schools, middle class schools, high schools for the high class students, and then normal and special. And they put schools of art in the normal or special. So it just made me feel good to say, okay, this was an innovation to do a bunch of this stuff. Here's where I want to start the conversation.
Awesome.
So I just really, really enjoyed that. And then I jumped to Aldrich.
Always a pleasure to review educational literature of a past century, you know.
Oh, if I could get a job as an educational historian, that if I had a dream job, and I don't, because I do not dream of trading my labor for money, but if I did, educational historian would be near the top of that list. But I want to jump to Aldrich in 1913. So we're still 110 years ago, and it's about industrial education. And adding industrial arts to the curriculum was an innovation, because the old thing used to be teach Latin, teach English, teach grammar, teach arithmetic, right? Those were the topics. And then it became industrial arts. Why are we doing that? It's like, because it matters. Why wouldn't we do that? It matters.
That's legit. Yeah.
So Aldrich is talking about the resistance that was found by adding anything work-related to the curriculum. And the number of people now that when I talk to that are, oh, if you go to university, take a degree that'll get you a job at the other end. That's
right.
And 110 years ago, it was, what do you mean adding this job stuff? Why are you adding this job stuff to the curriculum? So the pendulum has swung from one direction of the other. So, and they call it more or less of a hesitancy, which is nice instead of resistance. But
it totally is. And to the extent that it seems like all the colleges want to be polytechnics and all the polytechnics want to be universities. And there may be financial incentive and cultural incentive for the org to kind of make that movement forward. But again, in the case where Thompson Rivers, right, this place that I used to work at and totally haven't spoken about ever on the show before, they have they were an example of this where their industrial programs have a degree associated with them because of the university. Like they have the meat cutting place, they have the culinary arts with a university degree credential coming out of it, because they kept the college programming and then the org did a shift to university programming. And so the content and the processes, however much needed to change to accommodate that, I don't necessarily know that the culinary industry has changed significantly, to the point of a paradigm shift or whatever. So just the fact that you can have the mechanics trades, you can have all this stuff that at Thompson Rivers certainly filled up a lot of the roster for their programming, whereas where I went to university, St. Thomas University in Fredericton, University of New Brunswick, that was still very much on a established intellectual arts and sciences kind of model of education. The industrial arts or whatever are not part of their higher ed mix for the most part. So again, just kind of different approaches the different orgs are taking towards this kind of curriculum. I think it still speaks very much to the kinds of concerns that you're raising and are sort of being described here in this thing from 110 years ago.
Yeah, when I was at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia 25 years ago, a bunch of my friends were getting a degree in security. That's what their degree was in. So they would go be in charge of security for various locations, and they were getting a degree out of it. There was people that were taking nautical design. So how to design surfboards, how to design the hulls of boats and ships. And when I was there, you could get a bachelor's degree in brewing to become a brewmaster, which did not exist in Canada at the time. I don't know if it's there now. I know you can get certificates and diplomas and stuff, but I don't know of any degrees. Maybe there's some out there, but that was 25 years ago in Australia. So the innovation is there and it comes through, and originally it's weird, and then it's like, well, why not? It's because I look at all these profession ones, like, why do you need a teaching degree? Why do you need, in 1960, you didn't need a teaching degree. You got a teaching diploma or teaching certificate. Nursing was the same, right? Why do you need a business degree? Right? You get, it's all these other things became degree status things. Well, let's give everything else in society a chance too. Why not? Right? Who's making these rules? So anyway, I'll get off my my soapbox.
Well, no, but that's all good to consider, because when you're talking about what makes quote unquote innovation possible, it's organizational culture. Organizational culture as dictated by not just the social mandate of the thing, but by the finite amount of financial resources. Every organization has to make the assumption for its own survival that there is a scarcity financial resources that has to be ameliorated, and to that end, having programming which aligns with the market-based economy of trading hours for a job, for hours of your life for financial units, such as we are kind of stuck with, it seems.
Yep.
Like that's where we are as a society. So the fact that organizations are taking this kind of programming on as means of enhancing their own financial viability, it kind of makes its own sense once you start thinking of it in those terms, I suppose.
And thank you for mentioning social, because I don't think it is just economic. I think if society and culture says we need this matters to us, I think the need will get met. And that leads us to the next article by Hake, the 1994
Excellent.
Formative Periods in the History of Adult Ed. And they talk about social and cultural movements in the Netherlands. So you wonderfully guided us right to this next article. So thank you so much.
And they got the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century.
And
going back to Martin Luther putting the thing up on the door of the chapel or whatnot, right? I mean, that's serious stuff.
And what else happened around that time, right? Here, the printing press ended up becoming easily usable, easy user interface, right? And we know that the Europeans ripped it off the Chinese that had it for ages and ages before that. But anyway, like that started an explosion of knowledge in schools and reading and all of those sorts of things, right? Like literature rates.
It was the first thing that really made distance education scalable.
Yes.
To the extent that suddenly mass producing artifacts to show, here's your curricular package coming to you in the postal mail or whatever variety of it.
Yeah, which was basically the Bible. There you go. Here's your Bible.
All you need for reading is in there. You want a good story? That's in there too. You want to know how to avoid sharp objects being poked by, people with horns? Well, you can get some of that too, right? Cultural knowledge. You betcha. And if you're in jail and you're hard up for tobacco, you can kind of just take a page out and just kind of read it, memorize it, and roll up your smoke, right?
I think you're being facetious at that point, but yeah.
Yeah.
So their next step was about 200 years later. It took about 200 years for society to say, okay, we got to make another change, because then that's when societies, associations, and clubs all started to diffuse knowledge. They all started to get together and here's our little bits of knowledge about whatever the topic was. It could be poetry or literature or drama or lectures or scientific demonstrations, whatever that stuff was. So that was about 200 years to get to that. And then it was another 100 years before people started to say, oh, there's research now. People had started to do research. Let's leverage that. If there's a good way to do something, let's do it the good way. We're not doing it just the way we were taught. So that was the next step. And then finally in the 1970s, it's okay, now they're doing what every other Western country is and what a whole lot of Eastern countries are doing. And it's how do we actually organize this in a big, wide scale way?
Yes.
When it comes to like vocational training and education and not just schools for children, but how do we help the adults too, right? How do we put stuff in the evenings? And I didn't understand evening classes when I was at university. It was like, why do I got to take this class from 6 to 9 or 7 to 10? It's like, well, because the person teaching had a job. They went to their job.
There you go.
then they tried to grab a bite to eat, and then they came and taught me. Because in my head, initially, it was like, well, isn't everybody here all the time? And I was like, that would be nice, but no, that's not the way it works. But it was when society was ready. That's when these innovations happened, when society said, let's make it happen. Because we talked about the very first EdTech device, the Skinner's, that helped motivate Skinner, B.F. Skinner,
Yep.
a couple of episodes ago, and it was society wasn't ready. So it went nowhere. And in this Hake article, society was ready, and they led the innovation, saying, let's make this happen. So thank you for bringing up the social aspect of it.
Well, it's just, again, Bob Dylan wouldn't be Bob Dylan if society wasn't ready and in need of Bob Dylan. He's a guy in Minnesota and was able to sort of take his own creative process, not even that differently than what a lot of his contemporaries were doing in the same setting, but society just sort of had a need, whether they knew it or not, for a certain elevated, verbal sort of thing on the folk music paradigm to encapsulate a lot of public sentiment. And he was a guy who stepped into the slot. He was somebody who was practicing something at a pretty high level, to be sure, but it took society placing something for a value to be there to elevate that and recognize it, as opposed to, I don't know, somebody else who might have not been quite as skilled or whatnot, right? It's like, why is Kendrick Lamar headlining the Super Bowl this year? Why indeed? He's just a rapper on the one hand, but then on the other hand, his music by age 30 has been streamed and downloaded countless millions of hours of people's lives have been spent taking on what this guy has to say. So yeah, maybe, talent is one aspect of it. Being ready with your talent is another. But at the end of the day, it's culture, society writ large that gives you the stage or lack of a stage to act on, quite frankly. So
now, Bob Dylan is a problematic example of innovation to me.
okay.
Because I know the story, right? I know what he's done. I know he went from the folk and then he got the electric guitar, and then all the folk people hated him because they weren't here to listen to electric guitars and all the stuff. And I love Bob Dylan's work up until about 1969. And anything he's done
You agree
since,
with the
I have no use for.
That's cool. See,
Oh, yeah.
And what I see here is he was being recognized prior to 69 for his songwriting ability purely, right? And then changes in instrumentation, changes in his approach to writing and recording, that sort of fed his need as an individual and an artist to kind of move things forward in a certain way that made sense for him. But at the end of the day, Dylan, he wasn't appearing on Time magazine, necessarily past that first appearance with the electric guitar. They're not kind of laying his accolades on him. They're not making that biopic with Timothée Chalamet about when he was recording Oh Mercy or Blood on the Tracks. They're making a movie about him, featuring the time, like the film is literally called The Complete Unknown, when he had the innovative spirit and society was ready for it, but they didn't know it yet. Similarly, with this biopic that they have coming out with about Bruce Springsteen, there's this new film that's coming out with the dude from The Bear, Jake Paul Allen, whatever his name is. He's this dude who's in the TV series The Bear. It's this highly rated kitchen drama show on FX. So they got this up and coming young kind of actor who's going to be playing Bruce Springsteen again, not the born in the USA era Springsteen. It's like when he's writing Darkness on the Edge of Town, or no, when he's writing Nebraska. Sorry, when he's writing this weird, quiet, brilliant acoustic record right before. It's literally the album that came out before Born in the USA blew him up onto global whatever mega celebrity. So there's an interest in people's origins prior to the innovation. There's like an interest in like what conditions let this person be super creative, but then also get a huge amount of exposure. I know tons of people who are as creative potentially as Bob Dylan. I know tons of people who are as creative potentially as Bruce Springsteen and care about what they do, attention to detail and all of it. But it's the culture that sort of decides what is an innovation that they can be countenanced and what cannot, right? What's going to be rewarded and recognized and what isn't. What person's going to get tenure and what person's going to get, the slidey end down the chute all the way out the door.
And that's it. So for me to go back to Bob Dylan for a sec, like I went to see him in concert, all excited.
Okay.
And I was there with 3 other people that were also like, I like Bob Dylan. They were fans. Like they were
committed to him across his career and everything. Yeah.
And we all left the stadium saying, I didn't recognize a single song because he didn't stop innovating. He had reworked every single song. So it was, you couldn't tell what song he was singing at any given time.
He could have been playing Blowing in the Wind and it just would have been like with an organ and a whistle and 4 guitars on everything else. Yeah.
And so he was innovative and it was awesome to me and I loved it. And then he kept going. So it's just one of those things. It's like sometimes I think innovation could go too far, but it's also really none of my business. I don't want to buy his album. I don't buy his album. But it's that, how does it catch fire, right? How do you get lightning in a jar with innovation and have it work? And that's all. Like I do love this whole stuff. Yeah, it's one of those things.
Simply that, nothing more. Just you're giving you're kind of downplaying some pretty significant thoughts that you're ringing out here. Bob, if you're listening, which I'm sure you're not, but if we're using you more because you encapsulate certain aspects of our discussion at the moment more than our interest in you as a performer and an entertainer as such. No disrespect.
Yeah, none at all. So that's not what I mean. I'm just looking at the innovation. So I want to jump now to a 2004 article, Kirshner, Hendricks, Paz, Waparius, and Quarternow. And it's determinants for failure, success, and innovation projects. And this is one of my very favorite articles that I never knew was my favorite article until I read it this week. Because it made me think. Yeah.
Totally.
And they came to the point so nicely. They had all this list. It was all these lists of, okay, here's factors to determine success and failure. You got to do this, you got to do that. And we've already talked about a bunch of them. We've described all that with innovation. And they brings it down to a nugget of the human factor is often considered as the most influential factor on the chances of failure or success. And it just made me feel good. Because it's like, have you ever been on a project or ever been working on something and then this one person comes in and it's like, oh, we're screwed. It's going to die. Or somebody joins the team and boom, everything's amazing. It catches on fire and it breathes new life into it. It's the people part that is hard to measure, especially if we're talking about like electronic technology stuff. It's the people part that impacts it. So I just
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just about to ask you, like, do you have any examples of something like that you could share with us? That's all.
Well, I appreciate the notion here of collaboration. A couple of thoughts, one of them more serious than the other. The first less serious one being that I've had a whole bunch of students tell me they really appreciate that I'm not forcing group work on them. They're like, because somebody always comes in and you end up doing part of their work, or somebody's been flagged for AI or some stupid thing, and then they drag that onto you and you get flagged with it because you're part of that group and that person didn't know better and all this. That is literally the conversation I've had with a bunch of students. They're like, we appreciate it, but we're glad that we don't have to do it in your class. So that's kind of one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is sort of me thinking out of my literary holes here. The literary holes being simply that when I've been trying to, my approach to teaching a text in a class is that really the text is kind of the iceberg, right? What you're seeing is when you read something, those words, the fact that it's printed and organized a certain way, that's just the utmost part of it that the Titanic slams into, but it's just the tiniest little part of it where the vast majority of it is underwater. The vast majority of that text is subsumed by context, meaning, relationships to the individual, relevant or not, literacy levels, all these filters, all these cultural filters go into play in between somebody and like the text. And the text is simply there to recreate something that happened by the individual who produced it or individuals that produced it. And so, again, with an innovation, you're talking about software, you're talking about like hardware products and the like. Those are essentially just the tip of the iceberg in terms of like what went into their doing, what went into their becoming that, went into that becoming a paradigm that now we have to navigate. Well, it's actually some very specific dude bros in Silicon Valley had some dude bro conversations and dude bro workflows. And now that's kind of, the output of that, the whole social aspect of it is subsumed underneath the iceberg, water, so to speak. And the rest of it, the laptop, the friggin' app or whatever, I mean, that's just an artifact. I mean, it's got functionality to it, but it's just an artifact of designs and ideas that were made in meeting rooms and between and among very specific individuals.
And that leads to the second part of the Kirshner article quote that I have.
Yep.
Because a lot of times, if you're doing something in education, like you're bringing in problem-based learning, and you need that new pedagogic approach, and now it's AI, right? You're dealing with generative AI somehow because you have no choice. It's here. We got to deal with it. And
pretend
a lot of
doesn't
times,
exist. Pretend chalk doesn't exist. Pretend AI doesn't exist. I mean, wanting something to be other than what it is doesn't make it so, right?
yeah. I can walk outside in the middle of January and try to pretend it's not winter, and it's still winter. If I go out in a pair of shorts and bare feet, all right, I'm gonna know it. It's gonna happen.
My partner lady, my awesome partner lady who I'm hanging out with a lot lately, we're at her place and she started to shovel because we got some snow, and she was in her shorts, and then she realized, oh, wait a minute, even though I'm perfectly comfortable, because the temperature has mild, throwing a shovel of snow while I'm just sort of in my house coat and shorts is going to be it's going to be not seasonally appropriate to the thing, and so I finished up the shoveling because I was fully dressed for the day at that point, right? So I hear you, pal, very much so.
So one last thing Kirshner goes into is talks about what you need. You need proper investigation of all aspects of the problem or of the innovation, about what it's actually supposed to solve. What are the needs of future users? Are the participants going to be on board and going to be willing to participate to find success? And all of those things, he says, they're not really happening all the time in educational venues right now. It's
because they're being
ad hoc,
treated, Band-Aid solutions for problems that may or may not exist. I'm telling you, man, I'll be straight. We got one person at our institution, my current institution, running the Moodle, and the Moodle works fine for everybody in a thousands and thousands of students who have to interact with it. One person running it who knows what they're doing. And so in a previous role that I worked at, we're like, you need to tell me you have like this entire department of like 50 something people who are tasked with making something that one person can make work. Actually, like at the end of the day, it's a fucking Moodle installation. You don't need a whole team to run a fucking Moodle installation. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not that there's, I'm not denigrating the work of IT departments, but again, this department that I worked in, this so-called like learning technology and innovations, like 70% of their job was running a Moodle. And there was like 6 people associated with it, 7 or 8 people associated with it. Okay, call it Stockholm syndrome, call it whatever you want. I'm 2 jumps away from this now. And it's like one person is running this fine. So innovation, let's not overuse the word or denigrate the word any further through shitty practices or implementation and addressing needs that are mostly designed to keep people with their jobs at the end of the day, or add salary level or positions to a thing, right? That's like the opposite of innovation. That's like shuffling resources. That's like shuffling human labor around to match resources. That is not innovation even a bit. It's an anathema to innovation, if we're being honest. That kind of like, you know, sum zero kind of mentality with thinking there's only so much pie and there's this many people here. So, you know, innovation, like let's slit the pie thinner, right? Or somehow. I don't know, man.
It's the kingdom making. It's
exactly so.
The fiefdoms. This is where I have my power, and the more people I have, the more power I have. And it's like, I always get screwed over in that situation because my agenda is always the same. What can we do to help the students? And
if that
I've been
is what you
hammered
wake up
with
for,
that.
and if that is what you wake up for and spend your day with and go to bed, you're going to have a fine life as an educator if that's where you are focused. But as soon as you start thinking of it in terms of budgetary processes and just like, how do I keep my paycheck going as long as possible at an enhanced level as possible? How do I get more people that I'm friends with kind of at the same compensation level or within the org? It becomes more like a club for people with certain interests, drawing as much salary as they can justify out of the public purse. And again, silos, right? We talk about silos compared to interdisciplinary collaboration. We can talk in very similar terms about what promotes a culture of innovation, true innovation, and what is really just being done to reinforce existing hegemonies and make as much off the public purse as can be withstood, right? Kind of different set of agendas, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Bro,
and that helps me.
I'm getting an event. It's been a little while since I've vented in one of these. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I know. I'm here too. I've listened.
Of course you are, bro. Of course. But you're more responsible about it than I am. So what else we got here, Bren? We got a lit diagram here. Oh my God, this figure 3.
So we have Holdsworth and Mainz 2017, but what if I fail? And part of why I wanted to take a look at this article, it's a meta-synthetic study of conditions supporting teacher innovation. So it was teacher-centered, not institution-centered, and it was meta-synthetic. And I have no clue what meta-synthetic means.
I was wondering. I was hoping you were going to answer, actually. But it sounds cool.
It does. So well done, Holdsworth and Mainz. That is a great title. And what they're basically doing is they're taking the educator at the middle of the education innovation and saying, here's why this person matters. And they talk about the professional capital, the human capital, social capital, and decisional capital. And it talks about teacher skill, their technical knowledge, and their methodological expertise. And it's like, yeah, sounds like an educator to me. This is why we need to listen to them. And then they have this fantastic diagram. This is figure 3. There was other figures, but figure 3 was the creativity model. Yeah. And it talks about, okay, how are we going to do this Like part of the human capital is, okay, what's the teacher emotions at the time? If the teacher's burning out in the system, they're not going to be innovative, right? If the students aren't engaging, the teacher's not going to be innovative, right? What are the teacher's beliefs and attitudes? I have sat in those classes in late August, early September, in those classrooms where somebody comes in and says, these are the initiatives from the government this year. These are the initiatives from the school district this year. And I'm like, oh man, how am I going to do it? And the old timers are like, relax. This will die in 6 weeks. Don't worry about it.
This too shall pass.
This too shall pass. And it became that. And that's like the social capital. Like, what's the structure of the school, right? Is how does collaboration work in that environment? Does collaboration work? Right? Is there relational trust? If there's no relational trust, forget it. You're dead in the water. It's not going to happen.
One of my absolute favorite TV shows of all time, which is saying a lot for me because I got almost no ability to watch TV whatsoever, is this awesome HBO crime show from the early thousands called The Wire. David Simon is sort of the showrunner for that, and it sort of precedes, if anybody is familiar with the show Homicide: Life on the Street, the NBC show from the late 80s. Mid to late 80s. It was on for a few years. It's the same writer who was behind that show, who basically does this. It's a 5-season arc about the policing of violent crime offenders in Baltimore, which is historically a really rough industrial city with these problems. And the third season, actually, because every season the sort of venue shifts, where they sort of look at it from the perspective of the dock workers, or they look at it from the perspective of, the criminals kind of primarily. And so there's one, there's, I believe it's the third season, pretty sure, where they follow one of the characters. It becomes an investigation of public education. So this cop who just can't be a cop anymore ends up being a high school teacher in just this completely abandoned, one of these urban city schools that suffers from severe social neglect, basically, and all the turbulence and turmoil that comes along with that. And so the season, one of the major strands of the show that season is following this guy around in his journey to be a math teacher with these kids that previously he had been policing and chasing down alleys for drug crimes and shit like this. And it's a really interesting sort of look at how just by sort of turning certain elements of an educational situation around, suddenly you start putting like gamified learning in front of these kids who are running drugs or doing things in, low-level criminal capacities. They can relate to a gamified scenario. And so, again, right, sort of meeting people where they are, doing an innovation which lands in the moment that, has a particular, resonance or relevancy for your students. And so even though that's a fictional example, I just sort of think of it in terms of like popular narratives that have actually kind of gotten the teaching parts of it right, because they had a teacher right on the writing staff, like who just had a police officer who done teaching and then got into writing. And so this person couldn't talk about that world. So it's just, again, innovation happens where and when and how it needs to. And thinking of it as this sort of process you can institutionalize or process through like HR talking points or institutional vision and mission statements. I mean, it's all fine and well, but unless you actually have people who are committed to it and living the culture and are free to take risks without any blowback or anything like that, conditions which promote true innovation as opposed to just kind of hanging out in your, treehouse, getting as much bank off the public purse as you can for your sandwiches and beer, right? I mean, really, that's kind of the difference.
And that all fits into the decisional capital on this diagram that they came up with, right? The school leadership Beautiful. And the perception of support. And so Holdworth and Maines, well done. That was, they put it together really nicely. And I'm pretty sure they used Microsoft, like Microsoft Word to create the chart, because I've made very similar documents that look, or charts that look just like that, or images. So
It's
it
dope.
just made me smile.
User-friendly tools, for sure.
Yeah, they worked. Now I have a couple of little pictures. If you want to go to the website, you can go to analog-trope.com/podcast or oios.ca/ent and take a look at some of the pictures. And the one I really want to talk about is the Dilbert one at the end that I picked up back in 1999. So It's back in the day before the Dilbert guy became the Dilbert guy, with whatever is going on with him. And it's just the yeah. So this project will take 6 months unless there's unforeseen problems, and then the engineers start. What's an unforeseen problem? Right? Wally's unmotivated. Does he count as a? Have you anticipated that or not? Right? Was that foreseen? Was that unforeseen? How does that fit? Is that? And then it's things like, it's like, is the schedule, is that random? Is that foreseen? Is that unforeseen? It's like, he looks mad. He didn't see that coming. And it just becomes, welcome to implementing something new. It just made me smile more than anything else.
Lots of good ideas do not withstand implementation. And that's what separates good ideas from ones that are just fanciful, right?
Yep.
This is where having good people around you becomes helpful. That's kind of what I see there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have 3 last things. I have word, question, and phrase of the podcast. Word of the podcast is innovation, because we mentioned innovation a whole bunch. Question of the podcast is, what do you consider to be educational innovation?
Awesome.
And just to think about that, because that's how we started. And phrase of the podcast, the in situ phrase was, this article made me think.
Excellent.
And I know it's academic literature, should all make me think, but this made me think.
You have uncovered something here which really has affected your understanding of what we're even doing within the show, which is dope. I really am grateful that you had that opportunity, Doug, with this set of notes, and to be able to share this not just with our audience, but with me, quite frankly. So that's awesome, my friend. Glad to see that.
Right on. Well, thank you very much.
Cool beans. So for those keeping track at home, we're going to take a 10-minute switcheroo, and I'm going to change my background and maybe even my T-shirt, and I'm going to fill up my sparkling Perrier lemon-scented water glass, and then we're actually getting further down the stream with the innovation tip, right? So,
yeah.
See you on the other side. It's been a pleasure, folks. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.